Hello, I'm Khalil. And the first sign my family was getting ready to erase me was not a fight. It was a folding chair by the kitchen counter where my place at the table used to be. 2 days later, my stepmother handed me a bag of clothes, $100, and told me to go be independent. My father looked at me and said, "Just leave for now." Years later, when I built a life without them, they came back to my door asking for money. And before that night was over, the same woman who once threw me out ended up on her knees in my driveway. Before we get into it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Then stay with me. Because what they did before I ever walked out that door was worse than I understood at 16. The first time I understood my stepmother was easing me out of that house, nobody raised a voice. It was a Sunday evening in Fort Worth, late fall, the kind of night when the air turned cool right after sunset and the kitchen windows reflected the lights inside like a second room. I came in from the backyard after taking the trash bins to the curb, and my place at the table was gone. Not moved. Gone. For years I had sat at the far end, close enough to the dining room opening to see into the living room, where the television usually hummed low before dinner. That night there was a folding chair by the kitchen counter, silver metal legs, brown vinyl seat. The kind of chair people pulled out for unexpected company, not for somebody who lived there. Chrislyn was at the stove, stirring gravy like nothing in the world had shifted. "We just need a little extra room tonight," she said without looking at me. "My parents are coming over." I stood there a second longer than I should have. Then I set the plates down where she wanted them and took the folding chair. That was when I noticed my framed school picture was missing from the shelf in the living room. The shelf looked cleaner, balanced. Braxton's football photo had been moved to the center, his two small trophies polished and set on either side. My picture had not been relocated somewhere better. It had simply disappeared. The whole room had the strange neatness of a place that had decided what belonged there and what did not. Little things had been changing for weeks by then. My laundry basket no longer stayed in the hallway outside my room. Somehow it kept ending up in the garage. The throw blanket I used in the den had vanished. Braxton's gym bag could sit by the stairs for 2 days. But if I left a paperback on the side table, it was gone before bedtime. Chrislyn had a way of doing it that made a person feel foolish for noticing. "Let's keep things calm tonight. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Everyone's trying to get along." She almost never used my name when she said those things. She would just glance over and I would know. That was her talent. She could make a whole room turn towards you without ever pointing. The hardest kind of rejection is the kind that stays polite long enough to make you question your own mind. If somebody slams a door, at least you know where you stand. But when they smile, straighten the silverware, and edit you out one small piece at a time, you start wondering whether the hurt is even real. Whether maybe you are too sensitive. Whether maybe you should just be easier to live with. Dad came home 10 minutes before her parents arrived. Lawson Mercer walked in with his work bag over one shoulder, loosened his tie, and stopped when he saw the table. His eyes went to the folding chair, then to me, then away. He knew. That was the part that stayed with me later. Not just what he would eventually say, but what he saw before he ever said it. He knew my place had been moved. He knew I knew it. And still he kissed Chrislyn on the cheek, washed his hands, and asked what smelled so good. I told myself he was tired. I told myself he would say something later when we were alone. At 16, I still believed silence might mean timing instead of surrender. A little after 7, Sydney and Angie Hale came in dressed like they had just stepped out of church, though it was Sunday night and service had long been over. Sydney wore a pressed button-down and held his shoulders like the room ought to straighten itself for him. Angie had on a soft blue sweater set and pearls that caught the light every time she turned her head. They complimented the roast. They complimented the house. Angie told Braxton he was getting so tall. Sydney asked about football and nodded like the future of the country rested on whether my stepbrother had a decent season. Then, slowly, the talk shifted. "Teen boys need structure," Sydney said, cutting into his roast, "especially these days." Angie dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin. "A peaceful home matters. Everybody does better when they understand their place in it." Chrislyn made a soft sound in her throat, not quite agreement, not quite surprise, Dad kept eating. I remember staring at my plate because looking at their faces felt worse. Sydney went on in that smooth, reasonable voice older men use when they want to sound generous, while saying something mean. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a young man is teach independence earlier than he expects. Nobody said my name. They did not need to. It landed in my chest all the same, quiet and heavy, like grown people were discussing where to store a piece of furniture they no longer wanted in the main room. Not angry, not dramatic, decided. I got quieter as dinner went on. That was my strategy back then. Stay agreeable, stay out of the way, do not embarrass Dad in front of Chrislin's family. Make yourself smaller, and maybe the storm passes over. At 16, I still thought silence could save me. I thought if I kept my head down long enough, if I acted grateful enough, if I did not react to every little cut, then whatever had been turning inside that house might stop before it became something final. But by the time Angie was praising the clean lines of the living room and Chrislyn was smiling like she had built a better life from scratch, I understood something had already been settled about me. Not openly, not officially, but settled just the same. Some doors do not slam, they just stop opening for you. That was the first night I understood something in that house had shifted against me, but I still had no idea how quickly they were about to make it permanent. 2 evenings after that dinner, I came home from school and knew something was wrong before I even set my backpack down. The house had that careful stillness people create when they have already made up their minds and are only waiting for the other person to walk in. The television was off. No music in the kitchen. No cabinet doors opening and closing. Just silence. The kind that sits there on purpose. Chrislyn was in the living room, upright on the couch, ankles crossed, hands folded in her lap, like she was about to chair a meeting. My father sat beside her, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, looking at the carpet instead of the doorway. That told me more than anything else. "Can you come sit down for a minute?" Chrislyn asked. She used that voice adults use when they want credit for being calm while they do something cruel. I stayed standing for a second, then walked in and took the armchair across from them. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Not fear exactly, more like the feeling you get when you already know the answer and still hope you are wrong. Chrislyn started with words like temporary, space, tension, what's best for everyone. She talked about the house needing peace. She talked about her parents feeling uncomfortable. She talked about how Braxton needed stability. Every sentence circled the truth without touching it. The worst part was not the language. It was the rehearsal. They had done this already, just not in front of me. I looked at my father. "What are you saying?" He rubbed his hands together once, slow and tired. "Things have been strange, son." Son. He had not called me that in a while. I asked the only question that mattered. Where am I supposed to go? That was the moment. The one place where he could have stood up, looked at Chrislyn and said, no. He could have said I was his child, not a piece of furniture to move around until her parents felt comfortable. He could have acted like a father. Instead, he gave me the line that stayed in my head for years. "Just leave for now." Not loud, not harsh, almost gentle. That was what made it worse. I heard no anger in it, no conviction either. Just surrender. A man choosing a quieter dinner table over his own son. He said it like this was practical, temporary, manageable. But even at 16, I knew a lie when I heard one dressed up in a soft voice. I stared at him, waiting for the rest of the sentence, waiting for him to fix it. He did not. Before I could say another word, Chrislyn stood up. There was a small duffel bag by the hallway table, already zipped. She brought it over and set it at my feet. A couple of shirts, jeans, underwear, enough for a few days if somebody actually planned to come back for you. Then she pulled a folded bill from her sweater pocket and held it out. $100, she said. That should help you get started. She placed it in my hand like she was settling a bill at a restaurant. I looked down at it, then back at her. And that was when she said very plainly, "Go be independent, you piece of trash." There are moments in life when the room does not spin, when nothing dramatic happens, and yet something inside you breaks clean through. That was one of them. I did not shout. I did not throw the money back. I just stood there with that bill in my palm, feeling like the air had turned thin. From the hallway, I caught movement. Braxton was standing near the stairs. He did not step in. Did not say, "Mom, that's enough." Did not look embarrassed. He just watched, quiet and still, like this had all been heading in his direction for a long time, and now it had finally arrived. That silence shaped the whole moment. Families do this all the time. One person does the cruelty, another person allows it. The one who benefits most says nothing at all. I picked up the bag. My father still had not looked me in the eye. When I reached the front door, he finally said, "We'll talk later." No, we would not. I knew that even then. I stepped onto the porch with a duffel bag in one hand and a $100 bill in the other. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. Porch lights glowing, lawns trimmed, a pickup truck across the street with a flag sticker on the back window. Somewhere down the block, somebody was grilling dinner. That was the strange part. Family devastation does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes in the middle of an ordinary Texas evening, while the sky is turning dark and somebody nearby is flipping burgers. The front door closed behind me without a slam. I looked at that $100 bill again. I did not put it in my pocket right away. I held it so tightly the edge pressed into my skin. It was not money to me. Not then. It was proof. Proof that the people who had raised me believed my future, my housing, and my worth could be reduced to one bill in a bag that looked like it had been packed in under 3 minutes. I stood there another second, then stepped off the porch and started walking. I thought the hardest part would be hearing my father tell me to go. But the truth was, the hardest part came after the door closed, and I had to decide where a boy goes when home is no longer his. I did not head anywhere right away. I walked past 2 houses, then 3, carrying that duffel bag like it belonged to somebody else. The streetlights had come on by then. Sprinklers clicked across trimmed lawns. A dog barked somewhere behind a wooden fence, then went quiet again. Everything around me looked normal, and that almost made it worse. Humiliation is not always loud when it first lands. Sometimes it is so still you can hear your own breathing. I kept hearing my father's voice. "Just leave for now." Then Chrislin's, "Go be independent." Then that last sentence, the one that turned the $100 bill in my hand from money into something uglier. I still could not tell whether I felt more ashamed or more angry. At 16, those two feelings can sit so close together, they almost pass for the same thing. I reached the corner and stopped under a street lamp. I looked down at the bill again. It was folded clean and sharp, like it had been prepared ahead of time. Of course it had. That was the part I could not stop thinking about. They had planned for me to leave. Not maybe, not someday, that night. I needed somewhere to go, and my mind went to Andy. He was not the closest relative. He was not the kind of man who called every week or sent long messages on birthdays, but he was one of the few people on my father's side who ever looked at me like I was actually in the room. I remembered a Christmas card with my name written in his own handwriting. A handshake after one Little League game. A text once when I was sick asking if I was doing better. Small things, barely anything really. But when your life splits open, you run toward the smallest memory of safety. Andy lived in an older part of Fort Worth, in a neighborhood where the porches sat closer to the street and the houses showed their age without apologizing for it. By the time I got there, my legs felt heavy and my face felt stiff, like I had forgotten how to make an expression. I stood on his porch longer than I should have. Then I knocked. He opened the door in a t-shirt and jeans, took one look at me, then at the bag, and his whole face changed. Not into panic, not into suspicion, just understanding. "Come in first," he said. "Put that bag down. We'll figure the rest out tomorrow." That was it. No lecture. No "what did you do?" No demand that I explain myself before I crossed the threshold. I stepped inside, and for the first time that evening, something inside me loosened a little. Not much. Just enough for me to realize how tight I had been holding myself together. Andy took the bag from my hand and set it by the wall. He handed me a glass of water, then opened the fridge and asked if I wanted leftover meatloaf. I nodded because words felt harder than they should have. He did not push. He did not ask questions while I ate standing at the kitchen counter. After a minute, he pointed down the hall. "Spare room's made up. You can use it for the night." For the night. Even that sounded fair to me. My body could understand one night. Anything further than that felt too large to trust. The room was small but clean. A narrow bed, a lamp, a chest of drawers, one quilt folded at the foot. I sat on the edge of the mattress with my shoes still on. I did not unpack. I did not even set the $100 on the nightstand. I kept it in my hand until the paper grew warm. That is the part people do not always understand. Safety does not feel real right away. Not after something like that. Your mind may know you are indoors, but your body still waits for the next voice telling you to move along. At some point, I lay down fully dressed. I left the duffel bag beside the bed where I could reach it. I must have slept in pieces because every time the house settled or a truck passed outside, my eyes opened. Morning came gently in Andy's house. No cabinet doors slammed. No sharp voice from another room. No careful listening to figure out what mood the day had decided to wear. When I stepped into the kitchen, Andy was already dressed for work, pouring coffee into a travel mug. He looked up once, saw yesterday's clothes on me, and said nothing about it. He just slid a plate with toast and eggs onto the table. "There's coffee if you want some," he said. A few minutes later, Tammy Jo came through the back door carrying a grocery sack. She glanced at me, took in everything she needed to know, and simply said, "Morning, honey." No one asked what I had done to deserve any of it. That mattered more than comfort, more than breakfast, more than the bed. Sometimes the thing that saves you is not a miracle. It is one person who opens the door and does not make you earn the right to walk through it. Andy gave me a bed for the night, but by morning I understood something worse than being unwanted in one house. Nobody in that family had any intention of helping me to build a future outside it either. The next few weeks taught me something school counselors never put on a brochure. Life does not pause just because your family breaks your heart. Deadlines still come. Forms still need signatures. Graduation still moves closer whether you are ready or not. I spent afternoons at Andy's kitchen table with a yellow legal pad between us. He would read the paperwork, slide it back and say, "All right, one step at a time. Community college first. Loans if we had to. A part-time job once I could manage one without letting my grades fall apart completely." He did not talk like a hero. He talked like a man fixing a fence after a storm, post by post, board by board. That steadiness helped. It did not erase anything, but it kept me from falling apart in public. A few days later, I sat in my school counselor's office while she explained financial aid deadlines. Her voice was kind, practical, organized. I remember the hum of the air conditioner and the smell of printer paper. I also remember thinking how strange it was that part of me was still standing on that porch with a duffel bag and a $100 bill in my hand. My body had made it to school. The rest of me was slower. Eventually, I took the paperwork to my father's house. I told myself this was different. They had pushed me out, yes, but maybe even they would not go so far as to block college. Maybe this would be the line Dad would finally hold. It was not money I was asking him to hand me that minute. It was a signature, a chance, a little proof that I was not completely on my own. Chrislyn let me in with that stiff smile people use when they want to look decent without being warm. Dad was in the kitchen. Braxton was in the den with the television on low. The whole place felt familiar in the worst way, like my absence had already been measured and absorbed. I set the forms on the table. "I need a parent's signature for the loan paperwork." Dad picked up the packet and flipped through it without really focusing. His eyes moved, but his mind was somewhere safer. I waited. I could hear the refrigerator running and the sportscaster from the other room. Then Chrislyn reached across the table and laid her hand on the pages. "We need to think carefully about resources," she said. "Braxton's future is coming up too." That was the blow. Not "we can't," not "we're sorry." Braxton's future. I looked at the blank line where my father's name was supposed to go. It sat there clean and empty, waiting for a man who was already in the room and still somehow unavailable. Chrislyn kept going in that tidy office manager voice of hers. Timing, risk, responsibility, stability. She talked like she was balancing a budget, not deciding whether I had a path forward. "Braxton needs a strong start," she said. "You've already learned how to be flexible." Flexible. That word stayed with me. She meant disposable. Dad never interrupted her. He did not pick up the pen. He did not ask what my backup plan was. He did not say, "He's my son too." He just sat there long enough for her choice to become his. I took the papers back and slid them into the folder. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I think some part of me had already known the answer before I walked in. Hope had only come along because boys are slow to bury it when it comes to their fathers. After that, I stopped going over there unless I absolutely had to. Months later, sometime around the holidays, I saw one of their family pictures online. I do not even remember whether it came through social media or somebody showing me their phone at school. What I remember is the image itself. Lawson, Chrislyn, Braxton, Sydney, Angie, all of them lined up in front of a Christmas tree, smiling like one of those framed department store displays. The caption said something about family, gratitude, and blessings. I was not missing because I had other plans. I was missing because they had already rewritten the story and decided it looked cleaner without me in it. Sometimes the cruelest thing a family does is live as if your absence makes them look more complete. By then I understood something clearly, even if I did not know what to do with it yet. I was not waiting on support anymore. I was waiting on nothing, no signature, no blessing, no last-minute change of heart. If I made it out, I was going to make it out without his name on the line that mattered. That thought did not make me feel powerful. Not then, it felt lonely. But it was honest, and honest was better than false hope. Once I stopped expecting my father's name on the line that mattered, I started learning what a life built without him would actually cost. After that, my life got smaller and harder in very ordinary ways. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just expensive. Everything turned into numbers: tuition, gas, books, work hours, the cost of brake pads, the price of a used textbook if I bought it early enough, the extra $40 I could save if I packed a sandwich instead of grabbing food between class and work. Once you stop waiting for rescue, your brain starts measuring survival by the week. I finished high school while sleeping in Andy's spare room and pretending I was less tired than I was. After graduation, I enrolled in community college because that was what I could reach without pretending I had backing I did not have. During the day, I went to class. In the afternoons, I worked wherever I could: grocery stockroom, shipping desk, warehouse floor, any place that would pay me for showing up on time and staying useful. There were stretches when my car only started on the second try. A few nights I sat behind the wheel with my forehead against the steering wheel, willing the engine to catch because I could not afford to miss a shift. Lunch was often something cold eaten in a break room under fluorescent lights while a forklift beeped in the distance. More than once I fell asleep over a textbook with the lamp still on and woke up with a page crease on my cheek. No one claps for the years you survive quietly. Andy never turned any of it into a debt. That mattered more than I knew at the time. He did not keep score. He did not sigh when groceries ran low. He did not act like letting me stay made me his project. He would sit at the kitchen table, look over my work schedule, and say things like, "Take the Tuesday shift if it won't wreck your class load," or "Pay the insurance first, the rest you can juggle." That was his way. Practical, clean, never once humiliating. Tammy Jo helped the same way. A container of stew in the fridge, a clean towel folded outside the bathroom. A question about school asked like the answer actually mattered. Nobody in that house made me feel like I had to perform gratitude every minute to justify breathing the air. A few years later, I saw my father outside a church after a funeral for one of Tammy Jo's cousins. By then I was older, leaner, and worn in different places. I had a job, classes nearly done, and my own place lined up if everything held together another few months. He saw me near the parking lot and slowed. "Khalil," he said, "you doing okay?" That was it. Not I was wrong. Not I should have come after you. Just a careful little question, as if the weather between us had changed on its own. "I'm working," I said. "I'm in school." He nodded like he had some right to be relieved. Life got complicated. I still remember that phrase because of how small it sounded. Life got complicated, as if I had been misplaced by circumstance instead of pushed out by choice. He stood there with his hands in his coat pockets, almost like he wanted me to make it easier for him. Almost like one warm sentence from me could hand him back the version of himself he preferred. I waited for more. It never came. He could have said something honest in that parking lot. The price of honesty was only a few words. He still would not pay it. So I kept moving. Community college turned into more training. Entry-level work turned into responsibility. I learned freight schedules, inventory systems, staffing gaps, vendor calls, deadlines that could not slip, and how to think 3 steps ahead when everybody else was reacting in real time. Somewhere in there, I figured out something my family had never bothered to notice. My mind was good under pressure. Better than good, sharp. My first apartment was small and plain, but the lease had my name on it, and nobody could tell me to leave for the sake of peace. The first month I covered rent, utilities, groceries, and my car note without panicking felt bigger than graduation. Later, one manager trusted me with scheduling. Another let me handle customer problems. Then a supervisor started asking what I thought before he made decisions. Piece by piece, usefulness turned into value. Years passed that way. Not easy years, earned years. Eventually, I got an email at work about a promotion. Better title, better pay, a real office instead of a badge and a break room table. I printed the message and sat there staring at it with the paper warm in my hands. For a few seconds, I thought about sending it to my father. Not because I needed praise, not exactly. More because some old part of me still wanted proof that success might force recognition where love had failed. Then I folded the page once and slipped it into my bag. I did not send it. That was not bitterness. It was clarity. I finally understood I did not want to keep handing that man evidence of my worth and waiting to see whether he treated it like pride or inconvenience. By the time they came back into my life, I had already paid for everything they once said I was not worth, and that was exactly why they came knocking. A few months after that promotion, I started noticing how quiet my house had become. Not empty, not lonely, just steady. I would come home from work, set my keys in the same bowl by the door, loosen my tie, and stand in the kitchen for a minute before doing anything else. Some people do not understand how much peace can live inside ordinary routines until they have spent years being treated like a disturbance. I had built that quiet for myself. Every lamp, every chair, every framed certificate on the wall had been paid for the hard way. That was the life they showed up to interrupt. It happened on a weeknight, just after sunset. I had changed out of my work shirt and was heating leftovers when someone knocked on the front door. Not a hurried knock, not uncertain. 3 measured taps, then 2 more, like whoever stood outside expected to be let in. I already knew before I opened it. Lawson stood there with Chrislyn beside him, both dressed too neatly for an unplanned visit. She had a blue folder tucked under one arm. My father kept his hands in front of him, fingers linked, wearing that same expression he always wore when he wanted the world to believe he was caught in the middle of something he had chosen. For a second, none of us said anything. Chrislyn recovered first. We were in the area. Nobody says that in Fort Worth unless they want something. I should have shut the door. I know that now. But some old reflex rose in me anyway. Something left over from boyhood. Some part of me still wanted to believe there might be one version of this where they had come to say the words they should have said years earlier. So I stepped aside. They walked in like guests in a house they had not helped build. Chrislyn's eyes moved too fast. The sofa, the framed diploma, the watch tray by the entry table, the quiet, the order. She took it all in the way people do when they are measuring your life against the version of you they preferred. We sat in the living room. I took the chair near the end table. Lawson and Chrislyn sat on the couch. Then she placed the folder on my coffee table with the calm precision of someone starting a meeting. That was when the last bit of hope left the room. She opened it and turned it toward me. Tuition estimates, housing fees, meal plan numbers, admissions documents, a campus brochure with highlighted sections. Braxton's future laid out in tidy columns as if I had been called in to approve a budget. Chrislyn folded her hands. We're trying to help him get on solid footing. I looked at the pages, then at my father. He did not seem embarrassed enough to be there. That was what hit me first. He had not been dragged into this. He had come. Chrislyn kept talking. You know how expensive things are now. School, housing, all of it. Braxton's trying to make something of himself. We thought, family should pull together when it counts. When it counts. That phrase almost made me laugh. Lawson finally spoke, soft and careful, like he was trying to lay a blanket over a fire. It would make a real difference for him. I leaned back slowly. For him. Chrislyn nodded as if I had finally caught up. He deserves a good start. There it was again. Not exactly the same words as years before, but close enough that I could hear the old message underneath them. Him first. Him worth the risk. Him worth the money. Him worth the future. I looked back at the paperwork. There was not a single page in that folder with my name on it. Nothing about what I could afford. Nothing asking whether I wanted to help. They had walked into my home already treating my checkbook like a family asset. They were not asking from shame. They were presenting terms. I said, "That's a lot of confidence for people who haven't spoken to me in years." Chrislyn's mouth tightened. "Let's not make this emotional." That one nearly stunned me. A woman who had helped push a 16-year-old out the door was now asking me not to make things emotional. Lawson rubbed his palms together once. "Nobody's trying to fight." "No," I said. "You came here for money." Chrislyn sat straighter. "This is about opportunity. Braxton should not lose ground because things have been hard." I held her gaze. Things were hard for me. A small pause. Barely a breath. Then she said the ugliest thing she could have said. "Maybe being kicked out was the push you needed." The room went still. That sentence did not just excuse what happened. It reached back, picked up every ugly piece of it, and painted it as wisdom. It turned abandonment into guidance. It turned humiliation into character building. It asked me to thank them for surviving what they had done. I looked at my father. He stayed seated. That was the answer. Not just to the folder. Not just to the money. To all of it. I was no longer looking at two people who had come back with regret and terrible timing. I was looking at an extraction attempt dressed up in family language. They had not missed me. They had found out I was useful. I did not raise my voice. That mattered. I looked at the blue folder on my coffee table, at the neat highlighted numbers, at the admissions packet for the brother whose comfort had always outweighed my future. Then I looked at Chrislyn and Lawson and understood the full shape of what sat in front of me. This was not a visit. It was a hand reaching into the life I had built, assuming it still had the right. The moment Chrislyn called my exile a favor, something in me finally went still, and I knew I was done asking those people to recognize my value. For a few seconds after Chrislyn said that being thrown out had been good for me, nobody moved. The room held still in a way I had only felt a few times in my life. At funerals, in hospital waiting rooms, in places where the truth had already arrived and everybody in the room knew it, even if nobody wanted to say it out loud. I looked at the blue folder on my coffee table. Tuition estimates, housing costs, meal plans, a future outlined in neat highlighted lines for the brother they had always treated like the better investment. Then I looked at the woman who had once handed me a duffel bag and $100 and now wanted me to believe that was some kind of rough love. That was the moment something in me stopped reaching. Not for understanding, not for fairness, not even for an apology. I had spent too many years hoping somebody in that family would finally look back and call things by their right name. But sitting there in my own living room, listening to Chrislyn rewrite cruelty as wisdom, I understood I was done asking people like that to see me clearly. A few weeks earlier, one of the younger men at work had reminded me of myself. New hire, good kid, smart but too eager to apologize. If a supervisor brushed past him, he stepped aside too fast. If a customer got sharp with him, he answered like he was grateful to be corrected. I remembered watching him one afternoon by the shipping desk, shoulders tight, trying to stay invisible while still doing everything right. At the time, it bothered me more than I could explain. Now I knew why. That had been me in my father's house, careful, quiet, trying not to take up too much room. Acting like peace was something I could earn by making myself easier to dismiss. And all that silence had ever done was protect the people doing the damage. I lifted the top page of the folder, glanced at the numbers once, then set it back down. "So that's what this is," I said. Chrislyn folded her hands. "It is a chance for family to step up." "No," I said. "It's Braxton getting the future you decided was too expensive when it was mine." Neither of them spoke, so I kept going. "This folder says he gets tuition, housing, a clean start, Advisors, plans. You remember what I got, don't you? I tapped the cover once with 2 fingers. A blank signature line, a bag of clothes, $100. That was my launch plan. Lawson shifted on the couch. That isn't fair, I turned to him. No, it wasn't. His jaw tightened. Braxton shouldn't have to pay for mistakes that were made years ago. There it was, the old language. Smooth, careful, designed to make refusal sound ugly and surrender sound noble. I said, he already didn't. Chrislyn sat up straighter. Your brother is trying to build something. A good man would want to help. A good man would have signed the papers when I needed one signature. The sentence landed hard enough that neither of them spoke for a moment. Lawson leaned forward. Families move forward, Khalil. I laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because I had finally heard enough. You don't get to talk to me about moving forward when you never once turned around? His face changed at that. Not guilt, not quite. More like offense that I had stopped using the soft voice. Chrislyn cut in. You are acting like a victim all over again. No, I said. I'm acting like a man with a memory. That quieted her for half a second, but only half. She tried one last turn. Braxton has always had drive. He deserves support. I looked at her and felt something settle all the way through me. That's the point, isn't it? He was always the one worth supporting. I was the one you expected to survive without help, without investment, and now without complaint. Lawson exhaled through his nose. Don't punish your brother for old pain. That line should have shocked me. Instead, it just made the last door close. He could have said I was wrong. He could have said they should not have come. He could have looked at the folder and admitted just once that it was obscene to ask this of me after what they had done. Instead, he sat on my couch and dressed my refusal up as cruelty. I leaned back in my chair and looked from him to Chrislyn, then to the folder again. If my future mattered so little when I needed one signature, I said, my voice level, why does it matter so much now that I can write a check? Neither of them had an answer. So I gave them one more sentence. Calm, clean, final. You do not get to starve one son's future and call it wisdom just because the other one still needs feeding. That was the first time all evening Chrislyn looked uncertain. Not wounded, not ashamed, just uncertain, like she had finally realized the tools she had relied on for years were not working anymore. Guilt was not working. Family language was not working. My father's silence was not working. And once people like that run out of control, what comes next is rarely graceful. There comes a point when keeping the peace just means helping the wrong people stay comfortable. I could see it on her face then. The calculation, the shift, the moment she understood she was losing control of the room. Chrislyn had spent years mistaking my restraint for weakness, and the second she realized guilt would not move me, she reached for the only kind of power she had ever really trusted. The change in Chrislyn happened so fast it almost would have been funny if I had not known her my whole life. One second she was still trying to hold on to that polished, reasonable tone. The next it slipped. Her face hardened. Her voice lost that careful church lady softness and turned sharp. So this is who you are now, she said. You get a nice house, a good title, and suddenly you think you're too good for your own family. I stood up. Not quickly. Not in a way that could be twisted into aggression. Just steady. This conversation is over, I said. You need to leave. Lawson lifted one hand like he was trying to calm a horse he had no intention of controlling. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. That line told me everything. Even now, with the truth sitting open in a blue folder on my coffee table, he still saw this as a mess to smooth over, not a wrong to stop. I moved toward the front hallway and opened the door. Cool evening air drifted in from the porch. For the first time in my life, I was not the one being sent out. I was the one deciding who no longer got to stay. Chrislyn came up off the couch so fast the folder slid sideways. You ungrateful boy, she snapped. Boy, not man, not Khalil, boy. That word took her right back to the version of me she thought still existed. The one who would lower his head, keep quiet, and let her control the room. She kicked off one slipper with a sharp slap against the hardwood and grabbed it in her hand before Lawson even stood. It was such an old insult, such a petty, ugly kind of power that for half a second I just stared at her. Then she swung. The first hit caught my upper arm. The second glanced across my shoulder as I stepped back toward the open door. It did not do much physical damage, but that was not the point. It was the act of it, the audacity. A woman who had once pushed me out of a house now standing in mine, trying to strike me back into obedience. "Stop," Lawson said, but there was no force in it, no urgency, the kind of weak protest people make when they want credit for disapproval without actually taking a side. Chrislyn raised the slipper again. That was when I looked straight at my father and said, clear enough for both of them to hear, "You told me to leave for peace. Now you leave for mine." Neither of them had a response ready for that. I did not touch her. I did not raise my voice. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the security app. Then I turned the screen toward them. The porch camera had the whole angle. The open doorway, Chrislyn stepping toward me. The slipper in her hand, Lawson behind her, audio included, time stamped, automatically backed up to the cloud. Chrislyn's face changed right there. Not outrage, not embarrassment, calculation. I said, "You do not get to call this a misunderstanding later. You do not get to walk out of here and tell people I made this up." Lawson took a step forward then, finally awake enough to be afraid. "Khalil, don't do this." There it was again. Not "don't hit him." Not "Chrislyn, what are you doing? Just don't do this." As if the real problem had begun only when consequences entered the room. I tapped the call button. I did not threaten it. I did not count to 3. I made the call. When the dispatcher answered, my voice came out calm, steadier than I felt. I gave my address, said I had 2 people in my home who had come to pressure me for money after years of estrangement, said one of them had just struck me, said I had security footage and wanted the incident documented. That last word changed everything. Documented, not argued about, not hidden, not handled privately. Documented. Chrislyn took one step back, then another. "You cannot be serious." "I am," I said. "There will be a report?" Lawson asked, his face drained. "Yes." There was a pause after that, a strange, almost holy pause, the kind that comes when reality finally outruns manipulation. I could see it hitting Chrislyn all at once. The camera footage, the report, the possibility of charges. The neighbors. Braxton's tuition problem turning into something far worse than unpaid bills. For the first time since she had walked into my house, she looked small. Then her knees gave way. Not with grace, not with remorse, just fear, raw and sudden. She dropped right there near the entry table, one hand catching the edge of the wall, the slipper still hanging from the other. The same woman who had once handed me a $100 bill and told me to go make my own life was now on her knees in the house I had paid for without her, without my father, without anyone who had once decided I was not worth the cost. I stood there listening to the dispatcher ask follow-up questions while the air in the room changed. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel joyful. I felt finished. Near the front drawer, where I kept spare keys and old papers, was the folded $100 bill I had never spent. I thought of it for one brief second. Not as money, as measure, as proof of what they once believed I was worth. Sometimes the only way to end a family lie is to let the truth become public. When the flashing lights finally reflected across my driveway, I understood that winning did not feel like revenge at all. It felt like closing a door that should have been mine to lock years ago. Once the patrol cars settled at the curb, the whole street looked different. Red and blue light moved across my driveway, my garage door, the porch posts, even the low branches of the maple by the sidewalk. A few neighbors had stepped onto their front walks by then, not close enough to interfere, but close enough to see what my family had always counted on keeping private. That mattered, not because I wanted a spectacle, I did not, but secrecy had protected them for years. Silence had protected them even longer. The officers separated us right away. One spoke with me near the front steps while another kept Chrislyn and Lawson farther down the driveway. I told the truth plainly. I did not sharpen it. I did not soften it either. I explained why they had come, what was said in my living room, how she struck me, and what my cameras had recorded. When I showed the footage on my phone, the officer nodded once and asked me to email it to the address on his card. Just like that, the whole thing changed categories. Not family tension, not misunderstanding, not one of those messy situations people tell you to let go for the holidays. It became a report. That was one of the strangest feelings of my life. I had spent so many years trapped inside their version of events that hearing somebody reduce it to facts felt almost unreal. Time, place, contact, recorded evidence, possible charges, protective order. The language had no room for excuses about intention or family dynamics. No one asked me to be the bigger person. No one wondered if she had meant well. The truth finally had a format bigger than their comfort. Chrislyn looked smaller under porch light than she had in my living room. She was still trying to hold herself together, but the performance had cracks in it now. Lawson stood beside her, looking older than I remembered. Not wise, just worn out. He did not come toward me. He did not apologize in front of the officers. He just stood there in the shape of a man who had spent his life hoping consequences would stop one step short of him. After they left, the house felt quieter than it had before they came. Andy drove over 20 minutes later, still in jeans and work boots, and stood in my kitchen while I made coffee I did not need. He did not crowd me with questions. He just said, "You did right," and that was enough. In the days after, I answered follow-up calls, sent over the footage, and spoke with a lawyer about next steps. Nothing about it was dramatic. Paperwork never is. But there was relief in it. Each document said the same thing in a different way. What happened to me had happened, and it counted. A few days later, Lawson called. I let it go to voicemail first, then he texted. I never wanted it to go that far. I read that message twice and felt almost nothing. That was the saddest part. Not rage, not vindication, just clarity, because it had gone that far years earlier. It went that far the night he let me walk out with a bag and $100. The slipper was not the beginning. It was only the first time the world outside our family got to see the shape of what had always been there. I texted back once. It already had. That was all I gave him. One evening later that week after work, I opened the small drawer by the entry table. Spare keys, old receipts, the warranty card for the washing machine, and under those, still folded the way it had been handed to me, was the $100 bill. I held it between my fingers for a long minute. For years it had felt like a verdict. Proof that they believed my housing, my future, and my place in the world could be priced in a single gesture. But standing there in my own house, I finally saw it differently. They had not measured my worth that night. They had measured their own. That bill used to feel like the final word. Now it looked like evidence. I put it back in the drawer, not because I needed to keep the wound open, but because I no longer needed to hide from what it meant. That is what peace became for me in the end. Not the version my father used whenever he wanted someone weaker to carry the cost of his comfort. Not the kind that demanded my absence so everybody else could feel settled. Real peace was simpler than that. Locked doors, recorded truth, a life no longer available to people who mistook blood for ownership. I did not need Chrislyn ruined. I needed her gone. There is a difference. On the last night I thought about any of it for longer than usual. I walked through the house turning off lights one by one. Kitchen, hallway, living room. The blue folder was gone by then. The officers had come and gone. Andy had checked on me and headed home. Outside, the street was still. I stood at the front door with my hand on the lock and thought about my father's old line. Leave for now. Back then, peace had meant I was the one who had to disappear. Now I understood something he never did. Peace was never something he could hand me. I had to build it, protect it, and decide finally who no longer got to cross into it. I turned the deadbolt and listened to the click settle into place. Not fear, ownership. The boy they told to leave for peace became the man who finally understood peace was never leaving quietly. It was deciding at last who would never be allowed to make him disappear again.